But hi, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. I want to introduce Dr. Altaf Husain, who's going to lead the session on immigration today. And then I'll hand it over to you, Dr. Husain.
Sure. Well, welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. I'm Altaf Husain. As Amani just mentioned, I'm an associate professor in the School of Social Work at Howard University in Washington, D.C., and I chair the macro concentration, which is known within Howard as the Community Administration and Policy Practice concentration. And then I also oversee our field of practice specialization, which deals with displacement. And more recently, we have introduced a course called Urban Uprooting, which essentially helps students both from micro direct practice and macro direct practice to look at the impact of displacement on people, whether they're unhoused, impacted by disasters, whether they are immigrants, refugees, asylees, and so forth. And so that's the course that I specialize teaching in as well. And then by way of community leadership, I'm also involved with different aspects of immigration and refugee policies that are impacting particularly people who self-identify as Muslims, either who have already been in the country or who are recently arriving into the country. So I was hoping that today, and we have Amani facilitating and walking us through this conversation. But basically, the first question that was sort of posed for us to sort of review was about generally how I got into this work, and particularly this aspect of immigration. But because there's only two of us attending and the other two are helping with moderating and technical, it might be good to hear from you as well. And just to hear, if you just unmute, say hello, and tell us what institution or organization you're from, and then what particular interest you have in the area of immigration. And you can go in any order. There's only two of you, Emily or Sadia.
Hello, I think Emily is having trouble with the sound.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah.
I don't have any sound. Everyone else having trouble. I didn't hear earlier. I cannot hear anything. Okay. On your laptop itself, do you have a sound button that maybe that got muted somehow? Right? Okay, Emily, you're good? All right, welcome. So it's a small enough group that we're individually and personally welcoming you to the session. So welcome.
Thanks so much. I can hear now. I don't know what happened.
No, that's okay. Yeah, so I'm just gonna say to Kiara and Carolina.
Oh, wait, I could hear someone, but I can't hear you. Whoever just came on, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's going on, but someone that just came on, I could hear them, but I can't hear you moderating. I don't know why.
Oh, interesting. So when I speak, you're not able to hear me?
No, but I have captions, so I'll just use that for now. Did you just want me to introduce myself? Is that right?
Yeah, I was saying there's just a few of us enough to just say, if you say your name, and thank you, Mark and Carolina and Kiara, that you just say your name and the institution you're from, and then what's your particular interest in immigration or migration?
Okay. Yeah, definitely. My name is Emily Hendrickson. I'm a MSW and Masters of Conflict and Analysis dual master program at George Mason. I work right now for Catholic Charities. That's my internship, my placement, and I am passionate about advocacy for refugees. Currently, I assist as a school liaison for refugee children, and I get them enrolled in school, and I'm advocating for more early childhood education and opportunities for kids in Northern Virginia. So that's what I'm doing currently.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you. And again, the others, welcome. Alyssa, I think, are you from the senior leadership team? We're so honored. No, I thought I saw Alyssa before. All right, so Sadia, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Sadia. I'm a BSW student from Seton Hall University in South Orange, New Jersey. So my field placement is actually, it has to do with incarceration. It's not necessarily immigration. My interest in immigration is more personal, I guess. I'm also a Bangladeshi Muslim. So my parents immigrated here when they were teenagers. So I know that, especially in our community, there's a need in discussing things like mental health. So I guess my interest is more so on a personal note and kind of figuring out how to like facilitate that kind of language and that kind of space.
Great. Thank you so much. Welcome, Sadia. Mark.
Hi, my name is Mark Rosenkar. My preferred pronouns are he, his. I am currently an MSW student at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and I'm doing a practicum placement at an organization called Hoyleton Youth and Family Services, where we work with several families that are here from foreign countries. Definitely here to learn more about those issues and how I can use information gathered here to kind of inform my work in that space.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Welcome. Carolina.
Hi, it's Carolina. I have a BSW from the University of South Carolina, and I'm a current MSW student at Columbia University. And my field placement is with Representative Dan Goldman. And we actually have a immigration detention center, an immigrant refugee detention center here in our district. So I'm sure you all heard about the busing that's been going on from Texas and Florida. So a lot those immigrants and refugees that are being bused to us in New York could potentially end up at the detention center here in our district. So my principal, he's very open to like overseeing that they're funded accurately, that they're have in humane conditions. So that's something that I get to work on with my principal. But my interest in immigration is also personal. I'm a first-generation American. Both my parents are undocumented. So this is something that is very deep to me.
Thank you so much. Welcome. And,
thank you.
Alyssa?
Okay. So my name is Alyssa, and I am a current MSW student at Rutgers University in New Jersey. My field placement is at the New Jersey Coalition to End Domestic Violence. I don't have any experience working in immigration policy or anything like that, or working directly with anyone in this population, but it's just something that I'm interested in. I'm taking a global social work and social development class right now, and just learning about other countries and learning about immigration and like asylum, refugees. Like that's just something that I've found a lot of interest in, and so I'm hoping to just learn as much as I can in this breakout session.
Great. No, well, thank you so much. So I think as I said, it's a small enough group that we're able to kind of get hear from everyone. So as I mentioned earlier, I'll just reintroduce myself briefly in terms of my affiliation. I'm Altaf Husain, and I serve as an associate professor in the School of Social Work at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And I also chair what is called the macro concentration, which we call the Community Administration and Policy Practice concentration. And then I also oversee the specialization in the fields of practice called Displaced Populations. And the course particularly is Urban Uprooting, which looks at the impact of displacement on the lives of individuals, families, groups, and communities. And so we have both direct practice and macro students, who are registered in that course. This semester, for example, I have 18 students, and it's approximately split half-half to be able to look at that. And then my personal story would be similar to what Sadia was mentioning, and probably also Carolina, that I'm a son of immigrants, and then to the United States from India. And then I am also a descendant of immigrants, because then from my maternal side, my great-grandfather had migrated from Afghanistan to India, and then of course then the descendants from there stayed in India. So we resisted both of my sides of the family resisted the push to migrate and leave India at the time of the partition being orchestrated by the British Empire. And so I'm also a product of that resistance, that they said, this is our homeland and we are not going anywhere. whether it was to Pakistan or then in 71, the country of Bangladesh, they stayed in India. So when I basically look back and kind of think about how I got into this work, it was very intentional, because as I was working on, well, I'm a prodigal Asian son, so I did biomedical engineering for my bachelor's, because that's what my parents sort of orchestrated on that side, and they, the dad wanted an engineer, mom wanted a medical doctor, and so I thought if I did biomedical engineering, I could keep them both happy. And then at some point, I realized that my calling throughout undergrad was in student activism, in organizing student leadership. And then people were like, you don't come across as an engineer. And I don't know what that meant, because I was doing well. But I did know that there was a lot of power in organizing, which I'll address a little bit later in terms of immigrant advocacy work. And so I did a master's in social work after the engineering degree. And it was actually because of a very severe car accident just weeks before I graduated from my undergraduate degree. And when I was kind of in that mode, I thought, what if you died now? Like, what impact would you have had on the world? What would you have done to help? And then I did the soul searching, and then entered the social work program, who challenged me and said, "You've never taken a single social science course. So how do you intend to?" So I'm just giving you guys hints on persisting within what you want to do. So they say, "How do you intend on enrolling in a master's program that is obviously heavily social science based?" And my application essay ended by saying that my parents already taught me social work through their lives in serving, all the other immigrant families within Cleveland, Ohio, which is where we studied, where I grew up. So then I intentionally looked up Howard University, and this would have been in the mid 90s, and it was by books. It was not on the internet, and I found that there was a specialization on immigrants and refugees. And so I actually intentionally came to Howard University in Washington, D.C., and then got my PhD there, worked for the administration, and then continued as a professor, applied for a faculty position. So one of the other questions that was asked of us was just to talk about our career trajectory. So while I was doing my PhD, I was also the president of the Muslim Students Association of the U.S. and Canada, which is the sort of the umbrella organization for all chapters of Muslim student associations on campuses. There are over 500 of them. And this was in my second term, is when the attacks of September the 11th happened. And I realized, within just a matter of an hour, that the entire narrative about Islam and Muslims had shifted, and that we were now in a very defensive posture, and we would have to organize on campuses to protect our students from any harm, from any physical harm, and of course all the other microaggressions that go with that type of an incident. So ultimately, I was able to do that. I was able to navigate the organization and our student chapters through that difficult history. And if you remember, a lot of different policies came into being. They introduced a policy where they said, well, if you're here in America and not on a permanent residency visa, I mean, if you're not a permanent resident and you're a student visa or working, then you need to come and register yourselves. And in fact, it was a plan to arrest these people who came to register or to report themselves. And it was a nightmare on every level. And I remember being, quite disturbed that our government could have turned on us. And as I talk a little bit later about coalition building in this work, among the earliest of people who called us as Muslims were the Japanese Americans. And I'll pause there for a minute to ask you, why would the Japanese Americans call Muslim Americans to offer support after the attacks of September the 11th? Any ideas? Just unmute, raise your hand, raise all 5 hands, fingers.
Is it because they probably felt solidarity from the same way that they had been attacked after Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, exactly. And so the executive order that had been, implemented during just after the attack on Pearl Harbor, they knew. And I have to say that not only do I have a position of privilege in terms of the way I speak and the advocacy I do and the training that I've had, but there was no comparison between what happened to the Muslim community after the attacks of September the 11th and what was done to the Japanese American community. They were literally stripped of their property, their homes, their businesses, and put into internment camps within within the Western states. And it's a terrible a spot on our history, but that's who called us. So bottom line was that as I was doing my PhD, I had different ways to go about this. I had to either choose to remain in the advocacy scene. And I remember distinctly being downtown DC within a week of the attacks, and we were leading massive rallies. You can go back and Google and on YouTube and stuff. And the chant was that from Americans who were not of Muslim background, and many not even immigrant background, who were chanting, war is not the answer and Islam is not the enemy. And that was the chant, because remember, we were drumming up to go to war. We wanted to attack anyone and everything. And so there's a whole different session we could do about our response to the attacks. But that's what solidified my position to say, not only stick within this realm of advocacy work, but then now realize that a lot of people in social work are not aware of the impact and of displacement. And so you would be better off being a professor where you could write and impact policy from within, right? So you give the tools and you train students, and you actually, and many of our graduates from Howard University were very grateful from the Displaced Populations specialization, are placed in different parts of the State Department. They've started their own nonprofits and so forth. So just briefly about that. But now, in terms of the most common tasks and responsibilities. So again, we had a choice of whether we wanted to go with like a PowerPoint presentation and whatnot. But then I'm sensing that the more we have coming out of the pandemic and the more screen time we've had, it's almost like you can phase out and the screen just the PowerPoint slides just sort of Tesla advance, like self-advance, and no one's actually connecting. So what I'm actually going to do is walk you through what are the most common tasks that we take, that we are participating in with advocacy work. So number one, and this is probably the key to all of what we're talking about, is just building awareness and helping to develop consciousness about the issues. And so awareness includes knowledge, and knowledge sharing, knowledge generation. And if you think about that, you'll be amazed how many people within the social work profession are not actually aware of the racism that had been directly, integrated and infused into our immigration policies from the founding. So if we don't acknowledge that, if we're not aware of it, if we don't acknowledge that, that in itself is going to be a massive barrier, because you can't get people to join you in advocacy work if they're not aware of the difficulties that actually exist and the racism that is inherent in a lot of our policies. So how does that happen, right? Some of you who are actually in your different placements, you can unmute. What are the different ways that you are seeing, and maybe even you are doing, to actually share that knowledge, to build awareness and to develop consciousness about the issues facing immigrants, refugees, asylees? And again, there's just enough, a few of us that you can unmute and just answer, and we would love to hear from you. What are the ways that you're helping develop and build knowledge and develop consciousness about immigrants and immigration and refugees? There's no class participation grade, but it gives the speaker a moment to pause and catch our breath. Nobody's doing that at this point? Some of you are. Alia, go ahead. I'm not able to hear you. Are you guys hearing her? You're unmuted, but I don't know for what reason. Yeah.
Alia, feel free to put your response in the chat too if something's wrong with your sound.
Yeah.
For some reason, we can't hear you.
And remember to check your settings to be sure that all of your microphone and speaker are on the same system. You say same as system for the setting. Yeah. In the meantime, anyone else? Like, how are you developing consciousness about immigration, immigrants, refugees, in your placement, in your coursework, in your jobs? How? Anything?
So, a big aspect that we do, like here in the district, is that we attend like community meetings, like community board meetings, organizational meetings as representatives for Congress. And so a lot of that, what goes on in those meetings, is awareness and advocacy. We listen to the constituents. They're educating us, and in return, we provide them with updates on what is going on in the district. And with the Herc Center being a big aspect here in Brooklyn, that is something that's always, that's all. Those conversations are always happening. What is going on in that detention center? And constituents are very interested. They want to know, and so we are there to provide them with those updates and just building that consciousness, like you said.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else? No problem. So, so some of the ways we do this, right? So, number one, it is to come at these issues with a sense of a collegiality, so that we're not being condescending. We're not saying like, I can't believe you didn't know that. I travel quite a bit for different aspects of my work, and I sit next to people, obviously, and then you start to chat, and it's interesting how many times when I ask someone, because they always ask me, where are you from? And then where are you from? And then when we go through that, I always say, have you, checked into your own background, like your own roots? And it's interesting that they usually don't know. And so I remember a pilot for United Airlines and I were traveling during Christmas break, and he was next to me. He was, finished with his shift. He was flying back. And we spent at least 2-3 hours, because he's Catholic and Irish. And I said, man, like I've read and written so much about the impact of the American immigration policies on Catholics. And he was floored. He was like, what? And I was like, yeah, let's talk about this. So I gave him like a proper, master class on Catholic, experiences of Catholics in America. But I didn't say, like, are you, how could you not know? I said instead, let's walk through this. Let's talk about this. So number one is to respect people, is to allow for the ability for them to feel welcomed to that discussion, to that space, and to feel, as if that what they don't know is not a function of a deficit. We always talk about being strengths based. That it's not a deficit that they don't know. It's a reflection of our education system and, in fact, the priorities, right? We don't prioritize giving the accurate history of migration. We glorify things and we take, things sort of out of context and give bits and pieces. So number one, do that. Respect the people with whom we're talking. We're talking about knowledge. Number two, it is important for us to be aware of some of the factual the policies and the facts surrounding the the origin and the implementation of those policies. And that's, I think, very critical, because inevitably someone who does have an opinion about something will want to ask from you and learn from you, how did that happen? How did it come about that our nation propped up this policy, and what was the context? What was the background? And so if we're not aware of it, then we fall short. And when we fall short, it then becomes an emotional, like an argument, based on what I want and what you want. And it's not what I want and what you want. It's the lives of actual human beings that are in the in the mix here. And so we are thinking through how best to to help people sort of acknowledge that and welcome that. So that's the knowledge part of it. Then the second aspect of it is to help people actually know how policies get developed. Talk about the congressional structure, the idea of committees that work on these, the role of staffers. So it helps people to kind of be able to break down that this is not just some machine that just the Chat GPT just puts out a policy, and then people just adopt it and you run with it. No, there are actually forces in place. There are lobbies for migration and against migration. There are lobbies to expand, migration at certain points and restrict migration at certain points. There are lobbies to bring in a specific skill sets at certain times, and then regrettably abandon them and kick them out, or just basically forget about them. But that's not known to the average social worker, and even to people within our communities and in our constituencies. So that part of knowledge building is critical. So as I mentioned earlier, respect them, be armed and ready with facts and about the policies, and then be ready to have a little bit of conversation about how policies are actually enacted and come into being. The part about developing consciousness is critical, and this is where in social work we talk about to begin where the client is, right? To begin with the client and where they are. So that's why it's good to ask, what is your experience with displacement? And even if they say, no, I've never left America, you can say, have you ever moved, right? Have you ever moved? And so, our master students come from all over the world. And so some say, no, I've never, migrated, or I don't know anything about immigration. Well, what about displacement? Did you move? How old were you when you moved? What emotions and recollections do you have of that move? Was there a place attachment from where you came, from human behavior theory, and so forth? And inevitably people will say, yeah, I did feel that. I felt like I was young, and then I was just developing friendships, or I was in high school and I thought I would graduate with that class, but then I was uprooted, and then I was moved to another community, and then I never felt like I belonged. Well, guess what? Right then you found a common conversation piece, because that's precisely the lives of refugees. It's precisely the lives of immigrants, even those who come voluntarily and those who come from a forced migration framework as refugees and asylees. That's exactly what they're going through. They don't feel like they belong. They felt like they were forced into moving when they didn't want to move. They were put into situations, of losing privilege that they originally had in their countries and so forth, right? So that's a critical piece. And feminist theory actually is really heavily focused on that point about consciousness building, because oftentimes we take our privilege for granted. We take all of our statuses for granted, and even we assume that people will just come on board and say, well, of course, you must be aware about women's rights, and many people are not. Many people are not aware about what's happening with with specific aspects of women's rights and so forth, right? So that's point number one. Everybody good on that so far? Knowledge building and developing consciousness. So the second aspect of doing advocacy work, which is a common task that we engage in, is to try to understand what is our goal for this period of advocacy. Because oftentimes we as social workers are taught about self-care and not getting burned out. Well, what are you going to take on? All right. Is it something that's being imposed upon you? Meaning, for example, and I'll conclude with this in a little bit more personal way, but the travel ban that was introduced, and then the shutdown of the refugee admissions system with the previous administration, right? So that was something forced upon us, meaning we didn't know. In fact, if you really look at what happened that Friday of the last Friday in January, when that, closer to the end of the day, when that travel ban went into effect, there were even agencies of the government, including Customs and Border Patrol and others, who had no clue this was going into effect, and they were scrambling to figure out how to manage and how to implement this policy. So imagine advocates, how would we know, right? It had been promised, it had been threatened that it was coming, but we didn't know when it would come. And so that's a situation where you now have to decide. I mean, you have no choice. You have to jump at it and work on it. But there are other situations with immigrants and refugees where you're thinking long term. You're thinking, okay, now we're looking to see what should we do about elderly immigrants? What should we do about children of immigrants? What should we do about the education of immigrants? What should we do about healthcare and immigrants? What should we do about at the city level or a state level, for example, the driver's license and driving, right, for immigrants? So those are less urgent emergency type issues whereby we have some time to think through, and we will have to pace ourselves and decide what will be our approach. And stamina is a critical part of advocacy work. Oftentimes people get so excited, so riled up, and then they're in the streets, they're protesting, and then bam, nothing. You don't see them, you don't hear from them. And the people who are the recipients of that advocacy or the targets of that advocacy, they look and they go, oh, that was nothing. Clearly they were just, they jumped up and down for like 2 days and then nobody came back. And, people say on the first day, we will never leave, and then 2 days later, they're all gone. Everybody left. And so whatever you were advocating for, the stamina wasn't there. But if you strategize and you realize, okay, to get to a shift in a policy on driver's license, for example, and the ability for everyone, regardless of their immigration status, to be able to have a driver's license so they can operate, on a vehicle on our roads and then be a part of the whole safety, sort of infrastructure. What will that take? Well, we'll have to study it. We'll have to figure out who's on the city council or the state legislature. We'll have to figure out where they stand. What is their views on this? We'll have to think through. We'll have to approach them individually. We'll have to divide up and say, okay, so and so, you go to that district. So and so go to this city council meeting. Start getting conversations. As I think it was Carolina who mentioned earlier, this type of outreach is built into that development of a strategy for advocacy. And what I'm emphasizing in the second point is that we need to differentiate between those situations that are imposed upon us and those for which we have a longer term strategy, that we can sort of work through. Right? Are you guys with me so far? Good. All right. So this becomes a really big deal because the third aspect of advocacy work is that we cannot do it alone. So regardless of how much we want to, we're passionate, how much we have like a close group of friends or, associates and others who want to work with us, we have to come to a point of saying, what, how can I broaden this so that the participation of everyone else is not only meaningful, but impactful, and it helps us to show power in numbers. So the third point is after, knowledge building, developing consciousness, strategizing to develop the long-term or, short-term or long-term stamina. The third one is actually the building alliances and the development of alliances and the idea that we're not going to, just like with consciousness, just go to people and say, well, we're in this, you should just join us. They're like, why would we join you, right? What do we know about you? What do we know about what you stand for? What do we know about the strategies you're going to use? And so we have to be ready to articulate what it means to be a part of the alliance. So, for example, one of our, Gabrielle Jackson, is a Howard University School of Social Work graduate. She was the earliest and one of the co-founders of something called the UndocuBlack Network. UndocuBlack, one word network, right? So she realized that, hey, how come when everything is being talked about with immigrants and refugees, it often tilts towards what we call brown communities, right? Which are either Asian or Central South America, but there's less attention on Black immigrants or immigrants of Black origin, right? From wherever they are, whether they're Afro-Black from the Caribbean or from Africa, the continent, or wherever they're from. So she wanted to do that. She realized that in itself would still need alliances because there are already people in this space who are working on these issues. Now we're just saying to expand their consciousness and also develop the consciousness, but expand their imagination to include Black and brown communities when we discuss immigrant and refugee policies, right? So in alliance building, which is a very common, part of our work, it begins with, again, coming with humility, right? Coming with this idea that they've already been working in this space, or they're close to working in this space, they do something similar, but we want to bring them on board, to do this. So from those who have joined us so far, have you worked on any aspects of alliance building in the work in the space with immigrants and refugees? Anything that you want to share? What stands out to you about alliance building? You can unmute and speak or go to the chat. And I do want to acknowledge, Alia, thank you earlier for putting in the chat your comment about the different issues that affect immigrants. Alliance building, anyone had any experience with alliance building?
I have one, I think. We lately have been trying to build alliances with all of the Northern Virginia school districts in the area, trying to get them and just introduce like who our clients are. And because we're really struggling, of course, there's not enough funding for early childhood, and I'm trying to get refugees spots in early childhood placements. And so just introducing ourselves, kind of talking about our shared goals, offering to kind of assist them with if they need interpreters, because sometimes it's hard for them to have interpreters, and we have them at our agency, and just trying to like partner with them and like establish a relationship so that they know who we are. So when we come to them with our clients' needs, that maybe we can work together a little bit better. But I'm new at this, so there's a lot more I still need to learn, but it's been going well, I think, so far.
Thank you so much, Emily, for sharing. Anyone else with the alliance work? Any experience? Any best practices, lessons learned? So some of what we talk about, I just had to give a second if someone was muting, but some of what we talk about is that I mentioned humility. I mentioned also the idea of doing a audit, in terms of resources. So what do we have available in terms of human resources? What do we have available in terms of capital resources? And then how could developing alliances help us to expand on either? So sometimes we have a lot of ideas, great, amazing strategy, and we've worked out our planning, but then we're a small organization, and we would benefit from, expanding the pool of not only people who could help us, but specialization. So immigration attorneys, for example, others who are specializing and on the front lines of serving immigrants and refugees. Then expanding and developing alliances would help us to acquire those resources in a collegial way. Like we're sharing resources, and we're helping, and benefiting from that sharing that's going on. Another aspect of strategy for alliances is to say that when you go to elected officials, right, it is always better to be able to say, we are coming with the voice of, for example, at the local level, if it's the city council, to say 25 25 organizations, right, whom then represent 5,000 residents. And if you think about this, voting power is phenomenal when you can mention numbers. Like, these are people who are registered voters, who are in our networks, and I'm just giving numbers. So if somebody may say, well, 25 organizations and 5,000 people is so small. Well, it's just at the city level, right? These are actual people who are connected to each of these organizations. But whatever the case, when we make our case to these policymakers, we have to be able to say, this is what we have. We have 25 organizations with over 5,000 people represented, and here is what we are asking. Now, if you use the Saul Alinsky type of organizing, the asking can get ratcheted right up to demanding, and really be quite creative in terms of seeking attention. But at least the phases of that has to be there. So the other aspect of alliance building, when you show numbers, is that people will take us more seriously when we can say, it's not just me and my group of friends or my particular organization. We've been able to tap into the consciousness of all these different people. And when you look at coalitions, sometimes that's exactly what's happening. People are looking to see who is there and who is missing. And then if they are wise enough and strategic enough, they will go after the list of who is missing to start to detract from your position. Because then they'll ramp up. They'll basically position those people and prop them up as the opposition to your position, right? And we mentioned healthcare, education, the driver's license, any attempt at trying to, increase or improve benefits and access to benefits for immigrants and so forth. So the beauty of this, of the alliance building, is that it not only allows for a synergy to develop, the numbers are there to show power in numbers, but it also allows for creativity in terms of looking at the approach. So we may not have all the answers, but as we sit and we brainstorm, and in the advanced community organizing class I teach, we talk about the strategies of decision making. So in an alliance, you don't want to become paralyzed by always using, for example, consensus building to work on things, because you may never get to a point of consensus. But you could say, you know what, we will work on a strategy whereby at least the input of everyone is taken, and then we'll have a steering committee of sorts that reflects the voices of all members of the alliance and the coalition, and then we will put forward a draft of the best sort of position that we can take, right? And there's so many different issues we could talk about, but the goal is that the consciousness building and also the coming together on a draft position allows people to feel included. They feel like I had a voice, in incorporating, and I have to be mature about it and say, at the end of the day, the coalition decided that my particular amendment or my suggestion wasn't going to be included, but that's okay. At least I expressed my, my position and allowed for it to be, heard and put forward, right? So those are the key components of the day-to-day advocacy work. And the last one to conclude with is the importance of fundraising for these efforts. And oftentimes we as social workers are shy about this. I don't want to ask people for money. It's kind of weird. You have to ask yourself, okay, in the nonprofit world, the key word is nonprofit. So where's the money coming from? Where are the the funds to be able to help us to do this? Well, in that you can strategize, and that you can say, what, some of it will be through grant writing, and there is money out there from foundations who are supporting this line of work, and so you do grant writing to do capacity building. So if not everybody is interested in immigration advocacy and so forth, then capacity building to train community leaders. Say, you're already in this space, you're working on all these issues. We have a grant that will bring you in and will basically meet with you for 2 hours a week and will essentially get you certified, if you will, right? With a certain level of knowledge in policy making or in a community organizing or in outreach or whatever it is. So, and grant writing has so many other functions, but that's a key one. Number two is the ability to fundraise so that we can be more effective in our work. How are we effective? We have to pay people. Perhaps not exactly market rate, but we have to be able to compensate them for their expertise. So this work cannot be on the backs of people who are then struggling to make ends meet in their personal lives, and then we are propping them up as being the voice of all of this work. And every time they leave us, they're like drained and they're exhausted, and we've used them on the stage and we've used them to do all the outreach, and then they're like, I can barely make my own bills. I can barely pay my own daily costs, expenses of living and so forth, right? And I close with that, this portion of it, to be able to say that we as social workers have to have the imagination to say we will succeed, right? It's a strengths-based, it's an affirming stance that we will succeed in what we're trying to get done. In order to get to that success point, here are the things we'll need to do. Some of them will be comfortable for me as an individual. Some of them will be uncomfortable, but pull me out of my comfort zone. But for the sake of the issue, I'm willing to step into that discomfort to be able to espouse for or to stand for or to advocate for things that I did not know about, but I had to learn, and so on and so forth. So bottom line is, and I'll use the last few minutes to give you clear examples of how this works and how effective it is. So to close this out, the last question is share an experience of advocacy work, right? And how it basically challenged us and to respond and so forth. So that last weekend in January, when the travel ban went into effect, I myself was in the airport system, and of course I was domestic, so nothing was happening. I didn't feel the impact, but I saw that within a matter of hours on that Friday night, the airports across the country, and then basically bulging out. And Sadia, I think you said you're in New York. Are you right? I think you said you're in New York. Newark. Sorry. So LaGuardia, JFK, all of those major airports, Houston, LAX, SFO, here in Dulles, Washington D.C., all and possibly Newark, but I don't know why it doesn't ring a bell in my imagination. But all of them, people from every walk of life were at the airport saying, we as Americans do not stand for this. Like, we don't ban people from entry. We don't just randomly select countries and then ban them from entering and so on and so forth. Now, who was the major organization allowing. What was the critical need? It was lawyers, because at this point people were on the other side of customs trying to get out with actual legitimate paperwork to enter the country. So they needed lawyers. So one organization stood out, and this is where I did not know the power of this organization in this realm, and that was what challenged us. Is that how do you find this out? You find this out in the moment, in the heat of the moment. It was anyone remember? Anyone know? This was before I give all the answers. What organization stood out during that time?
Was it the ACLU?
Yes, for $1,000. Thank you, Carolina. Right. So that could have been a double Jeopardy question.
I worked with the ACLU during that time. They're a great organization.
But that was too easy. See, you're part of the family and relatives that are not allowed in the sweepstakes. So the idea was what, right? Here was the ACLU basically saying to America, we've always been here working on civil rights and civil liberties. Today, we're going to the airports. And with your support, you can help us to get lawyers on the ground, to be able to have retainer agreements and get paperwork signed. There were lawyers standing with portable printers. Literally, we're talking about laptops and devices. They had their phones and were sending, to their portable printers agreements that then the customs agents were giving to the people on the other side, saying, read this, agree to sign this, we'll have representation on this side, we'll work with you. Amazingly enough, the alliances fell into place. People showed up with coalitions. The consciousness was pricked because people saw on every major news station Americans out in the streets saying, we will not stand for this. We will not, in any way support a country that bans immigrants just, randomly and without any cause, and so on and so forth. Now, remember I mentioned fundraising? How much do you know, Carolina? You don't answer this. How much did the ACLU raise to support this work in that time of the tribal ban, the early days? Anyone have an idea? And Carolina, if you know, you can help, but
I'll just go for it and say billions. I don't know.
But Bernice, okay, that's always good. You can never go wrong when you say they raised. You say millions or billions?
I said billions, but I just put it out there.
Yeah, you can never go wrong by overestimating, right? So it was about $25 million. And when did they raise it? In the weekend of the policy going into effect. There are nonprofits that would die to raise even a few $100,000 in a year, let alone in a weekend. So everything I mentioned to you today had fallen into place. People that had no clue that America could ban people at the airports suddenly found out that could be a policy by virtue of an executive order, right? That they could basically put into place. That 25 million in one weekend, they typically raise between 4 to 5 million in a year. You see what just happened? So the power of alliance building, consciousness developing, getting out knowledge and information, basically saying to people the short-term strategy is to get the Supreme Court to intervene and to basically strike down these bans. And remember I talked about long-term and short-term, right? And then at the end of it, what happened? The ACLU said, this is too much money. So then they started talking about grants, giving grants to other smaller nonprofits working in this space, saying, we're going to share this with you. Just give us a proposal for how you'll use this to advocate for the rights of immigrants and refugees, right? So I wanted to bring that full circle because we only have until 2:50, but I'm hoping you got a good sense of what this work is like and why people like myself and others are so passionate about this. We teach about this. We advocate, in our non-academic lives about this, and in our academic lives, because even in the profession, right? The Society for Social Work and Research did not have a cluster where you can present on these topics of immigrants and refugees. They had something called race, ethnicity, and immigration, and I was the co-chair of that. But then I realized, wait, why would that be when there's such a massive? So we proposed, and I became the founding chair of a cluster called Immigrants and Refugees. So now people who are doing research, educating, writing, they can propose abstracts under that cluster for immigrants and refugees, right? A specialized way of studying this content. So I'll pause there and turn it back over to Amani. I'm hoping this was of some benefit to you. Hoping you'll enjoy the rest of the Advocacy Day, and we look forward to hearing more about what you will do in the coming months and years in this realm, much needed space of advocacy.
Thank you, Dr. Hussein, for that. I thoroughly enjoyed all of that session, all the information you shared. So I hope everyone did as well. If you have a couple minutes to stick around, we can have some Q&A. If any of you have any questions for Dr. Hussein that you want to ask, you can feel free to put in the chat or come off of mute if you would like to. And then there are some sessions going on at 3 p.m. So if anyone needs to transition, feel free to do that as well. But if anyone has any questions for Dr. Hussein, I'll open up the floor for that.
Yeah, I'm here, and I also put my email in the chat so that should anything come up, or and by the way, a good professor assigns homework. So so there are 2 reports online that you can Google. They're PDFs from the Center for American Progress called Fear Inc. FEAR Fear, Inc. Fear Incorporated, and then Fear Inc. 2.0, which chronicles the history of the attacks on the Muslim community, largely from that immigrant lens. Those are 2 reports that are online and free.
I do have to go, but I just wanted to say thank you, Dr. Hussein. This was very informative and very helpful, and thank you for fighting the good fight.
Thank you so much, Carolina from North Carolina. Take care. Yep. Any other comments, observations, best practices? We're all learning together. Anything you want me to elaborate on? Things that you thought I might have rushed over? We want to make sure you got your money's worth. Thank you, Miss Calicut. Oh, Miss Calicut is on, and she put the link in the chat. She's my graduate assistant at Howard University, and by far, and I'm not just saying that just because that she's on the call, but by far one of the best graduate assistants a professor can ask for. Lots of initiative taking, which is great.
I just have one question for you, Dr. Hussein, just
Yes.
to kind of like wrap all of this up. So how can, if for people who want to get more involved in this type of work, what are some accessible ways that some of these attendees can do to get more involved in immigration work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, it depends where you are in life. So, for example, and how much time and energy you have to dedicate to it. So, if it just means that you say, I have so much going on, I'd want to just be able to read and just have some regular, consumption of material on this topic. So, there are think tanks, for example, the Migration Policy Institute is an amazing organization in Washington, D.C., and they have everything is I think almost everything is free. So they have webinars regularly. They have and so you could sign up on their email lists. They they put out their reports. They're available online as PDFs, and you can attend webinars. You can attend if you live in this area or you happen to be in the DC area and there's something happening. You can attend in person because now programming is back in person. But it seems to me Brookings is another great place, and the Center for American Progress. So that could be one way, right? And you say, okay, you know what? At least I'll keep abreast of all of the developments, not everything, but at least things that are happening in this space. The second way is to say, you know what? Why don't I actually look to see what are some of the immigrant serving organizations in my area, and just pay them a visit. I mean, people love to talk about the work they're doing, and we don't actually hold ourselves up enough as social workers. We don't uplift each other enough. So if you just email or call and say, you know what, I just want to come by, and I was just hoping to just chat with anyone. If you do some Googling ahead of time and you find, okay, so and so is the immigration policy director, or somebody who is working with the lobbying, somebody working with government affairs, and that's your interest, you could go there. Or you could look and say somebody who's doing direct practice, and serving, providing direct services to immigrants and refugees. All you want to do is say, and if they say, it's too much physically coming in, that's fine. Even a 20-minute, 15, 20-minute Zoom call, just so I can, get a sense of what you're doing. By doing that, you're introducing yourself to them in a non-threatening situation, because you're just asking them, what do you do? I have no agenda. I am not a government agency. I'm not a funding agency. I just want to know what you're doing. While you're doing that, they're getting to know who you are, and you're getting to know firsthand who they are. And hopefully that can open a door to saying, hey, why don't you stop by? We have a, like a international food festival, something that they're doing. And then that way you get to meet and greet and see all the people who are working in this space. And that will allow you to then slowly say, you know what, I have an hour a week to volunteer, or I have 2 hours a week to volunteer. I can do, I can do write-ups, brief write-ups on things you need. I can do proofreading. I can do, in my spare time, I can do, helping with sending out emails. So slowly you start to integrate into their work. When there's trust, which is a big thing we talk about in this space, when there's trust of you and of your intentions and of your, capacity, then people will say, you know what, let's welcome them and give them more and increasing, responsibilities and involve them more. It may lead to a job. It could lead to a job. And if nothing else, it'll provide goodwill and help you to be a good ambassador of the work of that agency.
Thank you for that, Dr. Husain. We have a few minutes left in this portion of the day. Nobody else has any questions for Dr. Husain, then feel free to transition to our next sessions that are going on at 3 p.m. Thank you so much again for doing this talk today, Dr. Husain. It was so great. Thank you for everyone for watching. And yeah, you can transition back to the main stage for some information or to some of the sessions that are going on at 3 p.m.
Wishing you guys the best. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
So much.
Take care. Bye-bye. Bye.